Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 216 of the NC DWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, I have very special guest, Marco Aureliano, joining us. Marco is a former DRE. He taught SFST training to officers, did a number, I think over 40 DRE evaluations while he was an officer, and recently has opened up his own training and expert testimony and review company, KGM Logistics, based out of Gastonia. And Marco joined our firm recently at a mock trial that we did. As a expert witness. He was a obviously mock expert witness because it was in mock trial, but came in and gave an unbelievable detailed report of the situation, reviewed video and evidence of our client's situation, reviewed that, gave us an amazing report based on his review of the evidence, came in and delivered expert testimony during our mock trial, and was really powerful, I think, in terms of, again, just showcasing the importance of having experts review your case. I think it's so easy as criminal defense lawyers to take this approach of, I don't need an expert witness, or the case is in district court, or my client can't afford an expert witness. And we often don't utilize experts when, in fact, we should be doing that. Marco is getting ready to teach the SFST course that he formerly taught to officers on July 10th and 12th to members of the criminal defense bar. I think he's actually opened it up for prosecutors and judges as well. So I don't think it's specific to the defense bar, but it's approved for 24 hours of CLE by the North Carolina State Bar. This is something that he is passionate about teaching and bringing this to practitioners. So July 10th and 12th, the normal fee for the 24-hour class, and again, you're getting 24 hours of credit from the bar. The normal fee is $750. For anybody that is signed up for the Freedom Fighter Summit, he is reducing his fee to $500. So if you're already coming to the Freedom Fighter Summit in September, you are going to get a discount. Just let Marco know that you are going to be at the Freedom Fighter Summit in September. Marco will be at the Freedom Fighter Summit in September as a attendee, not as a one of the presenters. We don't have any practice area specific content at the Freedom Fighter Summit in September, but Marco will be there, so be happy to bounce questions, take questions, talk about cases, talk about his process. So feel free to reach out to Marco and let him know if you're interested in this course, that you're attending the Freedom Fighter Summit. You haven't already signed up for the Freedom Fighter Summit, you want to do that and then hit Marco's course as well. You'll still be able to take advantage of that discount. So learned a lot from Marco and hope you do the same. Well, Marco, it's been a pleasure getting to know you here over these past few months, and to have somebody that is so well-versed in basically all things officer DWI investigation related. We're going to talk here to kick things off about your training and experience and real life application of these principles. But it's been a real pleasure getting to know you as a person. We really had a fun time in our mock trial day with you recently. And thank you very much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with the audience.
Anytime, Jake. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a blessing and a great opportunity to have, you know, having to meet you. And I've heard such great things about you. I've seen all the great things that you've done. I've watched a few of your podcasts. So this is definitely exciting being here.
Yeah, it's a blast, and I think it's something that I feel like defense lawyers in general, DWI lawyers specifically, could take more full advantage of in terms of having an expert on your side. We don't, as defense lawyers, practice very often putting up our own evidence, putting up our own witnesses, and specifically expert witnesses. There's a lot of, I would say, probably unnecessary fear around trying to like go through the process of vetting and then ultimately in court like qualifying an expert. It's not as complicated as it sounds, and it's extremely helpful. But before we kind of dive in too far here, just give a little bit of background about kind of what your law enforcement experience looked like specifically on the DWI front.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my law enforcement career in 2016, which doesn't seem that far long ago, but
That's
I
pretty
guess,
crazy based on your CV. It's pretty impressive that that's as
yeah.
far.
But I hit it hard and I hit
Yeah,
it
you
heavy, and
did.
I've always, getting into law enforcement, I had the mentality of, well, whatever I do, I just want to be the best at it. And when I got into law enforcement, DWIs just kind of fell in my lap every day, and it became a thing for me. Well, I was always told in school that the hardest certificate you can get in law enforcement was a DRE certificate. So started my career in 2016. I got promoted to the traffic unit. I attended an SFST 3-day class provided by NHTSA in 2016 and learned a lot of cool stuff there. Wanted to seek out more training on it because like everything with DWI just fascinated me, from
Yes.
the whole drug impairment and building a good case in everything. Honestly, like DWI, you have to be the most thorough, and it transfers to everything else that you do in law enforcement is that case and setting it up.
Yeah, I feel like
So
if you can properly investigate and basically push a DWI case as an officer, you can probably do anything, including murder. I mean,
absolutely, and the biggest thing is, if you can document a DWI case
yeah,
properly, you're going to be great at everything else you investigate.
yes,
So I got into law enforcement in 2016, went to SFST in 2016, wanted more training, attended advanced roadside impaired driving enforcement, ARIDE, collected that. And that was just like a small teaspoon of everything that you would come to learn in DRE. And after that, and like seeing how the drugs reacted to the body, it was just fascinating stuff. But I got my A-RIDE certificate. I went on to become a DRE, or drug recognition expert, and SFST instructor. At the time, I was working as a traffic officer for the city of Shelby Police Department. After just under 6 years of working with them, I actually left and went to the North Carolina State License and Theft Bureau, where I got to investigate federal, state crimes of cloning motor vehicles, working cloned motor vehicle rings, month month long investigations. And one investigation I had was from October, and it, I didn't make an arrest on anybody until about April.
that's
So I mean, it was
crazy.
a pretty lengthy investigation, and if I hadn't been so detailed, thorough, and everything from where I learned from DWI work, I don't think I would have had enough probable cause going at that case. But it helped me put everything together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, one of the things that kind of sticks out to me in terms of, just kind of that whole training mindset is if you're going to do something, be the best at it. And I really do think that that's so critical in any field, but in terms of defending, DWI cases or traffic tickets or whatever, whatever the audience is listening to. We do. I've had officers in the past that have told me that they've listened to the podcast every once in a blue moon. If you're out there and you're, trying to learn, obviously you're pursuing that model of becoming the best. And I think that mindset is so powerful in terms of, whether it's adequately, representing your clients, adequately, pursuing a case and really trying to build a strong case, doing it in the way that you can be the best is really critical. And I think that that's why all of that training and continuous training is so critical.
Oh yeah, and especially in being the best. Like I'm not saying I'm anywhere near that. You want to chase down somebody 10 years ahead of you and
Yes.
keep going.
Yeah. 100%.
In any case, trying to have that mindset and realizing it is knowing that, well, I'm not there yet, and I don't know
Everybody
everything
starts
yet.
somewhere,
So
I mean, I don't
and
think we
then
ever arrive at that best designation
no,
either. It's just, it's something to be pushing for.
absolutely, and it's like kind of like an endless goal, but in one way you're a little bit better every day. You just have to know, you don't know everything, and you have to accept it. But I'm going to try and learn.
100%. Yeah. Well, I think, with your kind of background, as a drug recognition expert, and doing the evaluations and all of the training that is associated with that, bringing that to real time practice, ultimately teaching the DRE course. Tell me a little bit about, in terms of, we're going to just walk through some of the kind of big picture of drug impaired driving cases. And so, for the field officer that stops somebody, realizes maybe something is off. Like, this person does not appear to be acting normal. Something's wrong, but then they ultimately blow zeros on the PBT, and it's kind of like, where do I go from here? What are some of the common mistakes that you see field officers making, so non-DRE officers making, when it comes to a drug impaired driving case?
So there's like two sides to this coin, right? Like one side is like fresh out of rookie school, and I've been there. Like you stop somebody, you pull them over, and something's wrong, and you do your tests, you have them. This even without SFST training, you do the tests that you were taught, you put them on the intox or collect the PPT reading, and you see double zeros, and the first thing that goes through your head is, oh crap. What do I do right now? Because I don't feel comfortable letting this person go and all that stuff. What do I do? Well, in most cases, I feel like an officer will, they kind of like throw a Hail Mary where they have enough probable cause for an arrest. They go to sleep, they arrest the individual, and they go home and they pray to God something comes back in the blood. So, but on the other side of that coin too is like, officers that have been to SFST and ARIDE, they make, I feel like they make this mistake more than ever is they have been to ARIDE training. They know something's wrong. There's impairment, and they refer to the matrix and help them making their arrest decision.
Right.
And then they don't move forward with contacting a DRE. And I feel like that situation is, it's a dire situation and it kind of hinders and cripples your investigation.
Yeah, I think, that's something, we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, that's something that I've seen with relative frequency on drug impaired driving cases in Buncombe. And I know that other attorneys in our office have seen the same thing in other pockets of the state where there's not the same utilization of DREs that there was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Part of that might be, the availability of a DRE, but I think a lot of times there's just not even the there's no outreach to get a DRE involved. And so in terms of just kind of talking a little bit through that, what is kind of like the problems with an investigation, from a law enforcement side of things, where, an officer makes an arrest for drug impaired driving, but does not get a DRE involved to do a full evaluation?
So, I mean, like, this is going back to like the mistakes, like, not contacting that DRE in an impaired driving case. You can't, they, in this particular case, like if an officer who's received a ride training, oftentimes I feel like that mistake of not contacting a DRE, and the reason why it's the most common one, it just comes from ignorance. They experienced a ride, they look at the drug category matrix, they
They're
try
excited
and
to put those new field sobriety tests into practice. They're ready to go.
exactly. And that's the first time that they will be implementing those field sobriety tests is right then and there on an impaired individual. They're not trained and experienced on how to actually implement those tests and the reasons as to why they would, and the specific order you go through that 12-step process and why it's different than SFSTs and how you'd administer that battery it's specific, systematic, and standardized for a reason. And they look at the drug category matrix and they see, okay, well, it's constricted pupils, and that fits right here. And then they form an opinion, and they try and this is where it gets wild, is they form an opinion on something that they're not trained in. They effect an arrest. They don't have a DRE come out there because in their heads, I did it. I know what this is. I know why it is that. And why it's a problem is when you get to court, you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
And, I feel like that's one of the most common mistakes I see an officer make when evaluating a drug impaired driving case. If they received A-RIDE training is, they kind of just, they feel like they know it because they've experienced this training. And then they look at this, reference that, and then they're like, well, what do I need to call a DRE for?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And in terms of, obviously in the, A-RIDE manual, and the NHTSA SFST manual, there's indicators that if you think that there is a drug impaired driving situation going on, very clear, like bolded language, like reach out to a DRE. In your experience, like both on the kind of like participant side of things as well as the training side of things in A-RIDE and NHTSA, how much is that emphasized? And obviously it's going to depend on which instructor that you go to class wise. How much is that emphasized?
When I can't speak for every instructor, but when I taught it, I always explained, hey, look, if you don't know what's going on here, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that, but you need to contact the DRE. Anytime you have a drug impaired driving case, you should always look to contact a DRE. And you'd tell them, like, they're trained to do this. They are trained to give an expert witness testimony to the drug category or drug categories causing the impairment. And in today's society, with everything being more of drug impaired driving as opposed to alcohol impaired driving, it's DREs are highly unutilized.
Yeah, they are. And I think it's interesting because, in a lot of counties you may have, you know, uh, one DRE that's kind of operating in multiple counties. You might have a couple of DREs, but they're all with one agency, and then these two or three or four other agencies don't have a DRE. In terms of like your, again, just experience as a DRE, did you have at times officers that were from a different agency reaching out about a evaluation?
Yeah, I've had several. I mean, I've done some for Cleveland County. I've done quite a few for Cleveland County, Shelby Police Department. Back when I worked at the state, actually, you know, I got called in for a fatality involving an impaired driver. And at that point, I was assigned to Mecklenburg working for the state. So
Right.
you know, had to come back here, do that. I've done one in Belmont. Uh, I mean, you get contacted all the time, and sometimes
Yeah.
it's just about questions. Hey,
Right.
I'm not really too sure what to do here in this case. And in some cases, I've had officers, that weren't so experienced say, "Hey, something's wrong here. I feel more comfortable if you just, make sure that what I'm doing is correct."
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's one of those things where, it's hard to tell in any given agency, and depending on each officer's training, how many officers know that that is even an option or a lifeline. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, if you've gone through certain classes, maybe you have a better idea. If you've been through a ride, you might understand a little bit more what a DRE is, and what their involvement and process looks like. But for a lot of officers, I think it's you don't even know that that's a potential opportunity. And from a defense attorney standpoint, I think that that's something really to push, is really to just say, because I see a lot of situations where it's not as though there wasn't a DRE officer available. The officer will just say, well, I just never reached out to see if one
Yeah.
was available, or I never made any contact on that front. And I think that you can really push that envelope to say, well, isn't it true that, in this particular location, and obviously you've got to verify this, but that, DREs in this county will do it for multiple agencies. That's generally known. I think that's one way you can really push that side of things.
So you're actually they give you an almost like a pager app. If it's called Everbridge. It's an app, and they register for you and all that stuff. And
Okay.
if you put in a request for a DRE, it will set an alert to your phone call, text message, email, saying that there's an officer requesting a service of a DRE. This is the county. This is the arresting agency. This is the jail.
Oh,
All that
interesting.
stuff. And obviously, the good thing about it is you could do it wherever, right?
Right.
It's a nationwide certificate.
Right.
However, I'm at 10 o'clock at night. I don't think I'm going to drive to Wilmington, North Carolina, to go
Right.
do one. But I get those notifications,
So does
and
that
just
does
like
that notify for North Carolina, or are you kind of signing up for specific counties as a DRE then?
so, no, it's North Carolina. I mean, they
Okay.
sign you up. It's all over. So like I've had several like that will well, when I was law enforcement, I've had several of those alerts wake me up in the middle of the night saying, "Hey, we have one in Raleigh." It'll
Right.
just say, it'll
Right.
come through Everbridge, it'll transmit, and it'll ask you like, "Are you going to respond, yes or no?" And
Interesting. Okay.
so I mean, they do a really good job in pushing, the dispatch of a DRE if requested. So there's options there. You don't necessarily have to know one to request one. You just have to go through the proper channels of requesting one.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, see, this something I'm learning in real time. Love that. I mean, I think that's, very, very cool for officers that are trying to contact a DRE, that feature is available. And again, on the flip side, from the criminal defense standpoint, it's kind of like, if an officer is not taking advantage of that seemingly very available service, then it's kind of like, well, you can't just get away with saying, I didn't, there wasn't an officer available
Absolutely.
or somebody that I could talk to. Like, that's something that exists 24/7 for every county in
Exactly.
this state. So,
Exactly. And what's so crucial about it is, like it's there to help your case. There to help. I mean, a DRE can help the defense case. It can help the prosecution's case. I mean,
yes.
I've had a couple of non-impaired driving cases where I just did not see impairment. I tell everybody, or I told everybody, I'm not necessarily here for him. I'm here for you and him. If
Right.
there's a reason, if you're impaired and I feel that you're impaired, and there's a reason, and I will explain why. If you're not impaired, I'm gonna go tell that officer that I don't feel that you're impaired, and I'm going to explain to them why. What they do after that, that's on them. But
Yeah.
I'm there for both the officer and the defendant, or I was. I
Yeah,
should
no, I
say.
mean, yeah, I think that that's a really great way of framing it. I think it's always interesting to see how different officers kind of interact with a suspect. And I have, after, reviewing hundreds of hours of body camera footage, you get to see, officers that are crushing it in investigation and other officers that are not doing so great. And I've always felt that the officers that come up and just try to be nice to the suspect. I mean, obviously there's some situations that you're coming in too hot and there's really no
Oh
way
yeah.
around that. But 9 times out of 10, if you're stopping somebody because they went through a light or speeding, whatever it might be, you come up and you say, "Hey pal, what's going on? Where you headed? Where you headed tonight? What's tell me a little bit about what's going on? Why are you going so fast?" Just kind of like building that rapport versus, "Hey, do you
Absolutely.
know how fast you were going?" And all of a
Yeah.
sudden there's this confrontational wall. But I love the way that you just kind of laid out for DRE officers, because I think you can't do a DRE evaluation on somebody that's not willing to cooperate. So you've got to find a way
Absolutely.
as the DRE to get that buy-in. So I love that. I love that presentation, in terms of getting the buy-in of, hey, I'm here to do this evaluation. Based on what I see, I may go talk to this officer and just tell them that, there's no impairment. I think from just a practical standpoint, that's such a powerful way of trying to kind of gain people's cooperation. Because by the time you arrived, a lot of
Yeah.
these cases, somebody's been sitting on the roadside for an hour, or they've been arrested, and now they're back at the jail, and they're just like done with the whole process. So trying to get buy-in has got to
Yeah.
be pretty rough.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And like, and a lot of the tests that you're doing, I mean, you're doing several that are the same test that they just did. But
Yeah.
you have to explain to them, look, hey, look, I'm not here to say I'm not here for him. I'm not here. I'm here for both of you guys. I'm not here for anybody specific. And we're gonna do some tests at the end of these tests and at the end of this evaluation. I'm gonna determine, if you are impaired. I'm gonna sit here. I'm gonna explain why you're impaired. If you're not, I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna tell that officer you're not. I'm gonna tell them why. A lot of these tests that you're gonna do, they're gonna be the same that you did just a minute ago. I'm going to throw some other ones in there. I'm going to ask you some other questions. And depending on how you answer them, I may just have a couple follow-up questions. And, I've never had one person tell me, I don't want to do it. I mean,
That's
because,
so
you know,
interesting. I've
I
had
mean,
many
'cause-
clients that have declined to do the evaluation, probably sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. But I think, it's one of those things where I think a lot of that just comes down to what is that interaction with the officer like? And, can you get a little bit of buy-in on somebody that's on a short fuse, like
yeah,
there's not much left.
yeah, especially when you've been, like you said, you've been on the road, you've done these tests, you've already been arrested. And in some cases, this is like, this is their darkest hour. So it's really just how well you want to try and go in there.
I just think along that same lines, if you have somebody that has been, um, arrested and
Yeah.
they've, kind of got that, a situation where you've got an officer on the stand and is, talked about the DRE evaluation, something that you just spoke to about, there's several times that I did a evaluation and I didn't think that the person was impaired and explain that to the officer. I think that's a good question to ask a DRE is, how many times have you done an evaluation and not found the person to be impaired? That's in and of itself, that's not anything because, maybe every of the 12 investigations that officer did, there was somebody impaired all 12 times. But I do think that you see that same line of questioning in an alcohol related investigation where an officer says, I've had many alcohol related cases where, I let the person drive away after investigation. Maybe they can't say that same thing for the DRE evaluation side of things. So
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good, and when you get in a DRE's rolling log, you can see all, you know, all the evaluations that they have done. And it actually, you can see. I mean, I was very active as a DRE, and I became a DRE in 2019. In 2022, I was awarded by Mothers Against Drunk Driving for a top performer. I conducted over 22 evaluations. I've done 44 drug influence evaluations, and
That's a
I
lot.
mean, there's a couple non-impaired drivers on there, and just you're there to call a drug category as well as the impairment. If you don't feel, and in that same regard, a good practice I always did, where if I had one for myself, I would try and get a DRE for me, because I formed the opinion that they were impaired. I wanted a third party to do the eval and just try and, you're not told to do that, but I always try to do that just to give them a benefit of the doubt. Well, maybe I missed something. I want to make sure that somebody completely unrelated is seeing the same stuff I'm seeing, because in court that could help you out too.
Yeah, 100%. And, in terms of that DRE log, just to kind of jump
Yeah.
into that for just a quick second, I think that's something that is potentially powerful, because you could, see if the drug category that is at issue in your case is something that this DRE has dealt with in the
Before.
past. But what is the information contained in those DRE logs in North Carolina?
So a DRE log is just a record log that anytime they do an evaluation, or an evaluation is conducted by a DRE, it includes the person's information, the arresting agency, obviously. Uh, if you scribed, you did an evaluation, it calls and asks for the drug category or categories associated with the impairment, and then you corroborate that with a toxicology result. So, I mean, in some cases, like, it takes a while to get a tox screen back. So you may have the category called, but you may just not have the actual tox result back
Okay.
yet.
So that information then is contained and recorded in that, like, basically full log of any DRE evaluation that's been done by that
Absolutely.
officer. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
You
I think
do.
that's huge.
Yeah, because you would do an evaluation on somebody, whether it's in training, it gets logged. If you did, every 2 years, when I had a recert and I'd do an evaluation in front of an instructor, that was put on the rolling log, and you'd have to put that information in there. So every time you broke out the kit and you did it, and you were able to finish it and make an opinion, that gets put on that log.
Love it. Yeah, that's something that we should absolutely, as defense lawyers, be taking more advantage of, and trying to get in any case where there is a DRE involved.
Yeah.
So, well, in terms of like best practices for a DRE, what does that look like for it, kind of in your opinion, and some of the maybe the highlights that you were bringing out in the instructor or the classes that you were instructing? What were some of the kind of principal things that you were highlighting when it came to a drug impaired driving case?
Take your time. Don't overcomplicate the
Yeah.
investigation. A lot of times, in a drug influence evaluation, if you're there for at least an hour, right? So, and that all depends on, what the individual maybe have taken, maybe have not have taken, how cooperative they are, all that stuff. But take your time. You're going to be there an hour. Be thorough. Don't overcomplicate what you're trying to look for. And I liked what I did with the as a really good practices. You could always be a little bit better, or you could always add a little bit more. I took pictures of my the people I arrested while conducting the evaluation. A picture is worth 1,000 words. A lot of the times,
That
a
is
lot of
so
times
true.
these evaluations, they are not recorded. So
Yeah.
I want some kind of evidence documentation showing how they looked that night, because like I said, pictures worth 1,000 words. So I'd always photograph the suspect I had before even beginning the evaluation. I'd go through the evaluation. If it was from me, I would ask another DRE to conduct the evaluation just to kind of corroborate my opinion of whether I thought they were impaired. You kind of get two expert opinions then.
I love that. I mean, I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. I mean, from a criminal defense lawyer standpoint, I feel like that was one of the things that really hit home for me early on in cross-examination was I would feel like I would have to like hit these points in a really rapid order. And then if I didn't get like the answer that I wanted initially or what I was driving at, I would just move on to the next topic, move on. And I think that, that mentality of like slow down and just, kind of, you've got to be okay with things just taking a long time in court. One of the recent mock trial days that we did, was involving video and basically replaying a video for the kind of mock witness on the stand. And one thing that we were trying to showcase is it's okay to just play that video 5, 6, 7 times until you in real time can like ask the witness, it looks like this, is about, 1 second when it should be 4 seconds. It looks like, this time distance measurement on HDN isn't kind of corresponding. And it takes, you have to go through those things several times. You may have missed, the medical checkoff and you were right into lack of smooth pursuit. It might take 2 or 3 times to showcase the same video for the officer to say, okay, yeah, it looks like I only made 4 of those or 2 of those passes instead of checking for, doing the medical check off. And so I think slowing down is such a critical aspect of that. And then, you're just along the way from the DRE standpoint, you're building again that rapport with the suspect if you kind of take it slow. We're just going to kind of go through this. I also final thought. I love the video or pictures worth 1,000 words. To me, video is so powerful for the defense, and this is one reason that I really encourage defense lawyers to get the video. Is because it either generally really helps you or really hurts you, and if it helps you, it's great to have. If it hurts you, it's great to have that and sit down with your client and be like, this is what's going to be played at trial. If we take the case to trial, this is real time. Like this isn't based on somebody's testimony. Like this is what happened,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of put the ball in their court then.
You do. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of good takeaways from that. In terms of evaluators that you have worked with or things that have been brought out in training, what are some of the common mistakes that a DRE might make? And maybe that's just the opposite of best practices, but if there's anything specific that you see in terms of common mistakes.
A lot of the big and most common mistake you kind of hear about is just people missing their steps, right? And that just, that kind of comes from, well, I haven't done this in a while, right? So like, I don't have my cheat sheet in front of me in terms of like going through that 12-step process. It's been a while, but you're to other people, you're the big bad, you're the big bad wolf that's coming in here to handle business and let this officer know what they got. And they look at you in a different light and they may have, well, I've done this so many times. It's been a while, but we're going to go ahead and go through it. And then they miss something, or, if there's there's an issue, there's a little bit of laziness in terms of not taking their time. Like, if you don't get a proper reading on the sphygmomanometer, and which is just a blood pressure cuff, you may not wait the required time to retest it. You may be like, I think it was this, and you kind of just fill something in there. But I mean, it really just comes. The biggest mistakes you see a DRE make is just sometimes they do miss a step or two, and at that point they don't realize it until after it's done, or they don't realize it until somebody brings it out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that I feel like anytime you see you see, an officer or maybe or an attorney that has like that level of, high level expertise. It's only when you become kind of like prideful that what is it, uh those with the biggest egos, fall the
Yep.
greatest. Again, I'm butchering that quote or whatnot, but I think that that's true regardless of kind of what place you're coming from. The best lawyers that I see in Buncombe County, and they've been doing it for years, still are the most prepared. And there's just something to, and also have like that student mindset of like constantly bouncing ideas off of other lawyers and trying to grow, like we kind of said here at the beginning of the podcast, have that mindset of, wanting to be the best. But to be the best doesn't mean that you ever arrive. It's just really kind of having the humility to realize there's a lot of things out there to learn that I don't know. And, it's got to be tough when you're a DRE evaluator and you are not, you haven't done an evaluation in several months. And it's kind of like, I'm supposed to walk through this right now.
And dude, Jake, sometimes they I won't say they sometimes they could misdiagnose a category
Yeah.
because, by one, not taking their time, but two, they overcomplicate things,
Yes.
stick to the basics, stick to that matrix because you are not taught, you are taught about the downside effect in DRE school, but you don't practice it. So you don't really get to see that firsthand too often. And when you see it, it is very, very confusing because you are seeing indicators of a specific drug category, but you're seeing the major indicators for another one, and you're like, I don't understand what's going on here. I mean, you have to, luckily I had the opportunity to experience it when I was doing when I was doing my final knowledge test. Before that, we had to do our evaluations. We were at a Suboxone clinic, and one of the participants he was experiencing a downside effect. So like, and he was on a narcotic analgesic, but he's coming off of it. So his body's going back to homeostasis. It's
Yeah.
counter, so if you look at him, he is super fidgety, all over the place, super alert, everything opposite of what you would see in a narcotic analgesic. But when you started doing your evaluation with him and you started seeing it, well, all of his general indicators were matching up to this drug category. So it kind of like would make you second guess what you wanted to pick, as
Yes.
opposed to just keeping it simple and, you overcomplicating. You're like, I think there's both there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And it's got to be a challenge as well, when you're seeing somebody that is, again, basically, kind of withdrawing from a drug and exhibiting all kinds of like wild and erratic behavior. And yet it's kind of like, it's really the lack of impairing substance that's
Yeah.
causing that. So,
Oh, absolutely. The human body is very, very interesting. And if you're not careful when conducting your evaluation, I mean, you could very well easily misdiagnose something because or miscall, I shouldn't say diagnose, but miscall a drug category. And when you have, and in today's world, like, you don't get somebody that's just on one thing. They're always usually on
yes. Yeah.
this and this, or this, and they're all over the place. And you kind of have to like cipher through that drug category matrix and all your notes. And that's where your notes are super important, because
Yes.
most cases you're not recording this eval, so you have to document everything and anything. So I mean, it can get very squirrely and very windy if you're just going in there trying to pick one category, make a call, and go home. Like, you have to sit down, put time into it. And so I've had times where like I couldn't, I didn't feel comfortable making an opinion right then. So I
Yeah.
would go home, I would look at everything, I would go through the matrix, and then I'd be like, I'm pretty confident it's this is what we got. And then I'd make that call then.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In terms of the kind of taking those detailed notes you had mentioned earlier, being a scribe on one of these evaluations. I'm assuming that's just somebody that's kind of like documenting what is being observed as the kind of main evaluator is kind of walking through things with the suspect.
Yeah, so a scribe is literally just what you said. I mean, they're there to document the things that they're there to document the things the evaluator can't do. So like, I've had cases where I didn't have a scribe, and it can be pretty overwhelming because it's a pretty lengthy process, and you have to go through that checklist and all that stuff. And when you're doing walk and turn with somebody and you're having a scribe, well, you can kind of just you can call out what you're seeing
Yes.
out loud. They can write it down, but they may see something that you don't, which
Right.
is awesome too. But like when you're in the dark room and you're looking at somebody's pupil sizes, you can't see. So them being there and you're just like 3.0 left eye, 3 point,
Yes.
you can go ahead and do that and be hands free. Otherwise, you're going to have to stop what you're doing, put it down, look for your pen and paper, and you have to write that stuff down and document it. So I mean, a scribe is a very useful tool in the DRE program.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, it's a lot to be putting on paper. So that makes total sense. I don't know that I have ever, had that come up in terms of testimony, an officer, talking about having a scribe,
Yeah.
one of the DRE evaluators, but I can totally see why that would be of huge value just because of the details coming out on that
Yeah.
front.
Well, I mean, it gives the evaluator the time and opportunity to really observe what they're
Yes.
seeing.
Yeah.
If you have to hold around a clipboard and look down every time you see something, you're going to miss something else. And it's just having that person there, just be like you're just calling out what you're seeing. Misstep two, misstep three. Use arms on one. Things like that. You're not having to. You have somebody writing behind you, and you're just reeling off what you see. And it makes a big difference, especially when you go back and have to write that report.
Yeah, 100%. That's really cool. Well, one of the big things that we were talking about earlier is the lack of utilization of DREs for a number of different reasons, whether that's, not knowing that one exists, not, just feeling overconfident and like you can kind of handle it as an A-ride officer or SFST trained officer. So, one thing that I have seen a lot more recently is there's no DRE involved at all in terms of the day of arrest, but then come trial time, a DRE is introduced as basically, and I think you may have used this term, and I saw it recently online as well through like the National District Attorneys Association, basically using like a reconstructionist DRE testimony. Talk a little bit about what that is, and then kind of some of the limitations of that kind of, after the fact testimony.
Yeah, so reconstructed evaluation is obviously, there you don't have a DRE there to conduct an evaluation. Um, you go up, you make your arrest, you do everything, you process the individual. Months later, you go to court, and the state can call a DRE to come up there and testify to not so much impairment, but consistencies leading to like specific drug categories. And this poses a really big challenge because I don't really see it. I mean, I've never had to do it, and I've been asked to do it, but you rely heavily on documentation and documentation that you are not obtaining. So you have to
Yes.
rely on the officer who's handling the investigation. You have to go off their notes. And there's several factors in terms of the level of experience the officer had, how thorough they were in their investigation, whether they received proper medical, not so much records, but EMT reports showing like blood pressure obtained, pulse rate, temperature, um, body cam footage. All these things are something that the DRE is going to look at and kind of draw similarities and connect the dots in court, but they can't testify to the actual impairment. They're just testifying to what they observe and how it's consistent with this. But it really comes from, I mean, there's a lot of limitations just because, you don't know what kind of report you're going to get from the officer.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of, if one way that I think you could maybe think through this is if you had a suspect that, kind of basically calls off the evaluation midway through, at, step 3, they just say, I'm out, like, I'm not,
Yep.
I don't want to be, further tested, is in terms of offering an opinion, as a DRE, is there like a certain amount of steps that you need to complete to offer an opinion? Do you have to do any of the steps to offer opinion? What does that look like?
You have to complete that evaluation to form an opinion. The last step is the opinion, all right,
Okay.
and that's before the interrogation. And if they call it off after HGN, well, what do you find out, right? If there was no HGN, well, it's one of the 4 drug categories, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
but there's a lot to be like, oh, well, I can't really say it's this, 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 because each one of them have different major indicators, not so much general indicators where it's showing pharmacological effects of the drug, but you're seeing, the major indicators are really where you get your bread and butter from. So, I mean, if you're not conducting that full evaluation, there's not really going to be an opinion given. You're going to be testifying to what you observed, and you can say, well, in my opinion or in my experience, it's definitely not one of these drugs.
Right.
So it's one of these, but you're not
Right.
going to be testifying to the actual drug category or making a call on it. I wouldn't, because I mean that opens the doors to so many things from the defense. I mean,
Yeah.
if you don't have those tests, they show a lot of things, and then not only that, but you're looking at this person in the dark room. You get a lot of information from there. You get a lot of information from their eyes, from checking their pupil sizes and how they feel. If you locate any signs of previous ingestion, there's a ton of evidence there to help you out and kind of point you in the right direction. There's no you should not make there shouldn't be an opinion if there's no evaluation, because if
Yeah.
you get half an evaluation, you don't have a full opinion.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's just so to me problematic about calling an officer to do, this kind of reconstructive type testimony, because generally they're basically being asked to evaluate the field sobriety tests.
Right.
And, if they were there in real time, that would not be, they wouldn't give an opinion, just based on, the battery of 3 standardized field sobriety tests and how did the person sound, what did their, general appearance look like, and those type of things. Now, some of that goes into the DRE evaluation, but it's so odd to me because it's kind of like, well, this would never fly if the, DRE came in and didn't do the evaluation in real time and was just looking over the shoulder of the arresting officer. So why is it all of a sudden okay, months down the road, when they didn't even really get the chance to even see those general signs and indicators of impairment? So that's one thing that it kind of
And
rubs me the wrong way.
I mean, it's one of those things that it's like, when you're trying to get testimony of an expert, and especially with a drug impaired case, you need that DRE, you need their voice.
Right.
You need somebody that's been through that training to connect these dots and make it make sense. But, like I've never had a report, where I felt comfortable being like, yeah, I can definitely draw these consistencies, because you need, if I did a report, and I'm also indicating in my report the the temperature outside, time of day, all that stuff, sunny, overcast day, all that stuff, as well as the pharmacological effects of these drugs, where you see, like, droopy eyelids, body tremors, things like that. Because then that all that stuff, all those general indicators, do help play a factor in what you're seeing and what you're calling. Most officers that I've seen, they're not including, well, I saw eyelid tremors or I saw bruxism. They're grinding their teeth while I'm talking to them. I've never, unless they've had the proper training, I've never seen an officer put that in their report.
Right.
So, I mean, like those things that to me, they play such a big factor. I mean, any drug impaired driving case that I've got, I've always put their vitals in. If I had an EMS, I would always have EMS, because I'm not trained to draw blood. I know that they're working on something like that, but EMT would come out, they would draw the blood. I would ask for their vitals. I'd have them take the vitals and I'd put that in my report. I mean, obviously, and those change over time too.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is really, really powerful because again, it's just kind of like when you're doing that,
you get a lot, you build a lot of your evidence based on, that in real time,
yes,
interaction, because you're not only are you talking to them, you're feeling them. Like, because when you're gonna check their muscle tone, you could feel for that stuff.
yes,
You're trained a lot to a much higher degree of observing impairment, and you're going to pick up on all these general indicators, and you're going to know. Where as opposed to if you're looking at it months down the line, I mean, you really, if it can be difficult because you're relying on what the officer has documented and what kind of investigation they did. I've done one. Actually, when I was doing a consultation for an attorney, I watched body cam, dash cam footage, and I mean, the officer did a really good job in their report, but the dash camera, I mean, I was able to pick up with where it was. I was able to see leg tremors. I was able to hear slurred speech, signs of disorientation, drowsiness. When they put them in the car and I got to see their face and all that stuff, from the in-car camera, I was able to see droopy eyelids, eyelid tremors, things like that I'm just like, yeah, I mean, I could definitely see consistency right here
yes.
to this drug category. And, I mean, so it really just depends on what you have in front of you and what you can work with. That officer was a DRE, so I mean, he did a great job.
Well, Marco, I really appreciate the wisdom that you shared with the audience. I think that again, the DRE evaluation process can seem somewhat overwhelming. I think one of the things that's really helpful in terms of any drug impaired driving case, especially where you have a DRE involved, is to reach out to a defense expert and get somebody to look over the report, to look over the body camera, to look over the arresting officer's report. Again, during our recent mock trial day that you participated in, as a mock expert witness, really a lot of interesting things came out both during the trial, but I would say almost even more importantly in the extremely detailed report that you did ahead of that exercise and kind of laying out here are some of the issues with what the officer is seeing, what they didn't ask for, what they didn't do. And so in terms of anybody that is interested in reaching out to you to give an evaluation, again, I'm sharing, I shared in the intro, the dates of the 24-hour NHTSA class that you have coming up in July. But in terms of anybody that's interested in reaching out to you to do an evaluation or to find out more about other trainings that you offer, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to get in touch with me is visit my website at kgmlogisticsllc.com. It'll prompt you to chat now. You can shoot me an email. My phone number is on there. If you have any questions, I do provide case file analysis reports for, drug impaired driving cases, alcohol impaired driving cases. If there's video, if there's no video, provide expert witness testimony, district court and superior court. If you just need a consultation and you have a case that you're kind of questioning, is this a good case for me? I offer consultations where I will review your footage, review the notes, and I can definitely guide you in the right direction in terms of this is good, this is what we should push toward in court. and this is
That's
why.
awesome.
So, I mean, I definitely appreciate the time and the opportunity to come on here and kind of talk. And
Yeah, no,
have
I
it.
mean, it's great, Marco. I think we are so, fortunate. I think, getting a defense expert can sometimes be, again, feel like a daunting prospect. And so, just having that as a resource, having you as a resource in the defense community is a huge advantage. And really, again, appreciate you coming in and sharing your wisdom with the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jade.